All right, welcome back. If you're new here, this is a channel where I talk about different books of all different kinds. Most recently, we've been going through the Stormlight Archives, and we are now on day 8 of Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, which is currently the final book in the Stormlight Archives series. So last time we went over day 7, and I was a little bit of a Debbie Downer about the story. I was feeling a little bored with it. I had some complaints, but I will say day 8 has been much better. We have a big reveal that we'll talk about. So let's just go ahead and jump into that. And the big reveal comes along with a vision from Shallan's perspective, where we go back and see how she actually killed her mom. Because we already knew that. We already knew that she actually killed her mother, which is a big part of her past trauma that has stuck with her throughout all this time and has led to her personality splitting and all of these other more psychological or psychiatric issues that she's had. And we get to see a bit more in depth, a bit more intimately what actually happened that day. And we see that her mother was working hand in hand with Nail, who has all of his own issues, which we'll talk about, I believe, even more in day 9. But we'll put that aside for now while we talk about her mother, who ends up being Chana, which is one of the other heralds. And this brings up a point that is just, it's almost genius how hidden in plain sight it was, that as they struggle to decide what to do with Shallan, Nail, and Chana, Nail says that she must kill Shallan, her daughter. And we see that Chana, right before taking Shallan's life, hesitates. And it's in that moment that Shallan summons her shard blade out of true fear and self-defense and kills her mother. So let's pause for a second and ask the question, okay, why does Chana want to kill Shallan in the first place? And a better question may be, why did Nail want Chana to kill Shallan? And what we get on that note, as far as this chapter is concerned specifically, is Chana referencing that Shallan is, quote, one of them. And I think that we may guess that she means she's one of them in terms of the fact that she's bonded to Spren, and so she may be a part of this return of the desolation. Or perhaps it has something to do with her being pulled into the Ghost Bloods from an early age, maybe a combination of the two. I think that the most likely thing is that she's bonded to Spren, and so they're concerned that she's going to bring about the desolations again. But we, I think, leave room for other things being true at the same time that may come up later on. And Nail says that to kill her would be legally justified via the Vaden Voidcraft Act to punish those who seek power. So I think that Nail has really been pushing Chana more and more and more to do this. I don't think Chana would have necessarily wanted to do this on her own, but I think Nail, with his obsession with following the law and his obsession with trying to prevent the desolations from coming back, that he has pushed her to this point. But we see in the final moment that Chana wants to hesitate, that she does hesitate. She doesn't want to actually take her own child's life. Almost no mother would. And so it's in this moment that Shallan, out of fear for her life, kills Chana. Now Chana, as we said, is a herald. So this is the part that was hidden in plain sight. I knew that to break the Oath Pact, that it only took one of the heralds to break it. And that's why they finally had the idea to send Taln alone back to Braze, because he's the only one out of all of them who never broke. So they said, okay, they made this deal with honor. Can only one of us go back and hold it on their own? They send Taln, and he does this for millennia. So all this time I'm thinking, along the lines of, well, why did Taln finally break? And I shouldn't have been thinking that way, because if he didn't break for all this time, then it would be more likely that something else occurred. And yes, obviously, what could have occurred after all this time is any one of the other heralds could have died, been sent back, and then gave in, causing all this to happen. So it was Chana, and this is in fact what did happen. I'm just surprised that it didn't cross my mind as an option to explain things. It should have dawned upon me before having to actually read it here. But it's just another added layer of, oh my gosh, that Chana was Shallan's mother overall. We didn't even need that added detail to make this as surprising as it was to begin with, but all of it together just elevates it all the more. And then we see that Chana was at Shalon's wedding. Shalon recalls this. Oh my gosh, she was at my wedding. That's my mom. And so we get some more information on Shalon's wedding as she goes back to her wedding next in a vision. But first, we have a flashback from Szeth 9.5 years ago, where he visits the bondsmith monastery. And inside he finds many spren that are pinned to the walls with different crystals. It's this really horrific scene. And there's an unmade entity, and Szeth can't tell if the voice is male or female, but towards the end of that chapter, it's mentioned that she could do it to other people as well. So it seems like we get our answer to that, and that may be really just a clue as to who this unmade is. So Szeth's decision is that he leaves the monastery without conceding to what they want from him. So we see that back then, he's still struggling with this idea of whether or not to go his own way or whether or not to just follow others. And it's his fear of making the wrong decision that pushes him more and more in the direction of just conceding overall. But we see that he wasn't always this way. It's always been somewhat of a challenge for him to decide when to go his own way and when to just follow others. And this isn't unique to Szeth. This is just psychologically something that everyone goes through, especially as they're growing up, as they're a young adult, young adolescent, and they're finding their own way. It's this challenge of when to trust yourself enough to say that you feel confident in knowing that even if the crowd goes left, it may be correct at that time for you to go right, because you do so at your own peril oftentimes. There are many reasons why people do different things, but the crowd isn't always correct. So it comes down to, self-efficacy and your self-confidence, looking back across your life and saying, I've navigated successfully at all of these times, and I have the confidence that I'll be able to do so again in the future or in the present. I know what I should do, and I have the conviction to do that. But when people make mistakes or they have a lot of guilt or a lot of shame that they're carrying around, then they may not have that self-confidence. They may lack the self-efficacy to feel as though they can rise to the occasion. And so in those times, they may find it easier to just fall in line and do what they're told or believe what they're told, despite where it's coming from. And this becomes a problem whenever they get too used to that, and it becomes just something that they do automatically without thinking, and they get stuck in that pattern. So this is a big psychological factor that Szeth's story has been illustrating for us all along. Then Adolin gets a peg leg. They're able to heal his leg just to the point where he can get a prosthetic attached. I still think that he's going to become radiant and be able to heal completely at some point in the story. Then we get that vision that I mentioned where Shalon next goes back to her wedding so that she can find Chana and have a conversation with her. And it's during this conversation that she realizes how sick her mother was and is. She realizes how far she's come. She tells her mother that she has forgiven her, and Chana tells her something that I think is important for us to know. She says, "Do not trust any of the heralds except for Taln," which I think we could agree with, that Taln has been the one that has stayed true to his purpose all along, while the others have seemed to slowly fall away from their original intentions, perhaps. Taln has stayed true up to this point. And we were questioning, again, well, what happened with him? Why did he finally break? And now we see that it wasn't him. It was Chana who was sent back after Shalon killed her, and it was Chana who finally broke. Then we see that Odium sends Dalinar back to the hideout where Evie was burned alive by Dalinar's own hand, unintentionally, but still that's how it happened. And this is Dalinar's most traumatic memory, the thing that he is most fearful and reticent to face. And Odium knows this. That's literally why he sent him back there. He's trying to break Dalinar. But Dalinar doesn't break. And it's also during this that he realizes that Odium, the new Odium, is actually Taravangian. And it's a big revelation for Dalinar, but he's like, oh, now that I see it, yes, it makes more sense. And during this vision, Dalinar, as I said, he doesn't break, but he does things differently. He has a chance to make amends in some ways. Like, he knows that it's not gonna actually change the past, but during the vision, instead of just watching it play out helplessly, the way that it did actually happen in reality in the past. He does things differently. He tries to save Evie, and after this, he's sent into another vision where he sees Honor in a cell, and Honor seems to be crushed. And it's at this point that we think that we're going to get to see more as to what actually happened to Honor, but it cuts off. So it's not fully explained yet, but it like sets up the stage for it. So I think that we'll be seeing before the end of the book more details and hopefully so around what actually happened to Honor. And it's looking like it's going to come from this perspective within this vision that is from Dalinar's POV. So a lot of big things happening in day 8, much more of an engaging read compared to day 7. And of course, the books have always had kind of these ebbs and flows and these slower parts and these more interesting parts. So I'm just happy that day 8 was picking up the pace and giving us some big revelations, giving us some payoff really after all this time. So then we get into the interludes, and we'll talk about those before we wrap up this video. The interludes start with one that is around Risen, and we haven't seen much of her since Dawnshard. That's actually been another qualm of mine, you could say, is that we had this entire book, Dawnshard, that set up all of this information around the Dawnshard and around Risen, and it's seemingly been for no effect. But I understand that there are other books within this Cosmere, and that he also plans to write more books for the Stormlight Archives specifically. So it could be that those events and all of that information is going to come into play later on, or relates more to other books within the overall Cosmere. But still, it's like a little bit frustrating for me that it was inserted where it was within the order of the books for the Stormlight Archives specifically, if it really had no real consequence. So we get to see more around her, and we see that there's some more veiled information about the Dawnshard, which doesn't make me feel really any better about it, that he's bringing up. Remember when we talked so much about the Dawnshard and it really had no consequence? Well, here's a little bit more veiled information about it that still may not have any other consequence. So maybe it's just going to come up later in the Stormlight Archives, or maybe it relates to some other books in the Cosmere. I'm not really entirely sure. But then we have another short one from Odium's POV, and we see that Dalinar is able to escape his clutches, seemingly using a shard, perhaps the Shard of Honor. And Odium thinks that he should go ahead and destroy Honor, but how could he? Does he really have that ability? If he does, you would think that maybe he would have already done this. And I find it hard to believe that he has the ability, although Honor seems to be perhaps not entirely dead, as people keep saying, but certainly in a weakened state. So maybe Odium could. We'll see what happens with that. I don't expect it to happen, but we'll see if he at least even tries to kill Honor. So that is day 8. And then that leaves us, of course, with just day 9 and 10. So I'm already making my way through day 9 and getting prepared to wrap that up. And then we'll be looking at the very end of the story overall. As always, whether or not I seem to be enjoying these books or not, I appreciate your time watching these videos, and I appreciate just having this place to share my thoughts on what I'm reading. I enjoy that. And if you enjoyed this video, press like. It just helps out the channel. Subscribe if you want to see the upcoming videos on the Stormlight Archives. And then, of course, a lot of other different books outside of this that I plan on reading after we wrap this up. And I will see you in the next one.